Right, video number 4 in my list series for rookies, and this time I'm going to talk about the Leafblower list, what it is and how to play it and how to play against it. The Leafblower term comes from Warhammer 40k, where Imperial Guard players would take all the biggest guns that they could get and place them in a corner and just shoot the enemy up before they could get to them. It used to be quite effective in 40k, and the term has sort of stuck around. And you can build lists that do similar things in bold action, although not in exactly the same way and not with as many guns. So, how to build it? Well, you start by taking one of the nations where you can get quite a lot of HE guns. France is good for this. I think Belgium is as well, because they have that free medium howitzer, right? So that means that you can have extra guns in your list. Japan can do it, surprisingly enough, because they have grenadiers, and that means that you can place quite a lot of indirect HE fire in your lists. Expensive, yes, but quite good. So that's also an option. Finally, I think that the USSR, the Soviet Union, and Germany can make versions of this list, especially if we go into theater selectors, where the USSR can have some of their theater selectors where they get multiple choices of tanks, for instance, or similar stuff, where you can place stuff like multi-rocket launchers, Katyushas, in the list. So, how to build? What you do is you go in, you pick the biggest, meanest looking artillery piece that you can find. Usually that's a heavy howitzer. Could be a medium one if you don't have the points for a heavy. Heavy is harder. You pick the heaviest mortar that you can find for the points, medium or heavy again. Works well. And then you look for a tank in your list that also has a howitzer. That means by now you have 3 guns, one of them mobile. That's pretty good. And if you can, you put grenades on your infantry. France can do this and Japan can do this, although both are quite expensive for just like a light mortar, right? So not very good, but they can do it. And if you can, see if you can find some multi-rocket launchers. This means that you have an artillery park that is quite impressive. It has a lot of shots coming out of it, and much of it is indirect fire. So the enemy, if they want to do anything, they're going to have to move up against your artillery. And if they try to do that, then you start firing at them. And if they like go to ground and stick around going down every turn or whatever, then you start firing indirectly. Remember to put spotters on as much of your artillery as you can, because you're going to need them when you deploy. This type of list is not very mobile, and it doesn't deploy well considering what other lists can do. The final thing that you take when you build this list is you take some infantry that can go out from your base, your artillery base, and try to claim objectives, because there will be scenarios where you're going to need that. So that is the build. That's all it takes. Usually this means that most of your points will be in artillery, right? The infantry then is often subpar. It's usually inexperienced dudes, but that's what you take. Right, how to play it? You're going to need to use your spotters and use them well, because most of the time what you do is you start out by placing your artillery, and you place it in fire bases where you can sort of dominate the table. You look for lanes along the table where you can see, basically, if you can, the enemy's deployment zone. That would be good. Otherwise, just look for lanes where you think that the enemy will have to cross that lane. And then you place your artillery so that it can look down that lane. Preferably, you place it in cover, hard cover if you can. If you're deploying on the board, here's a neat trick. You can deploy in buildings and in ruins. Ruins are better because buildings are sort of a death trap if the enemy has HE or flamers, right? But you can place your artillery inside them. You cannot move inside them normally, but you can place it if you're starting there. So that's a good trick. See if you can find some ruins and just place your artillery in those. That's always good. Hard cover for preference, soft cover if you cannot get anything else. But the good idea is to place it in area terrain, because if the enemy gets so close to you and charges you, you at least get to fight simultaneously, right? So that when your artillery dies, it will hurt something. Right. And that means if you're cutting the table up in these kill lines, that means that most of the time the enemy will try not to be in them. That is where you need your spotters. Your spotters will double your kill lines and will make sure that you can see the enemy if he goes to ground or if he starts hiding behind stuff. And then you start just shooting indirectly. Let me see, I made some notes for this. Yes, your infantry. Your infantry is not really needed until turn 4 and 5. That is when they move out and see if they can grab objectives or whatever you need to do. Until then, the infantry should be in total cover. Wherever you can find that, go down and keep them safe, because they're not going to be able to take the enemy on in a fight. So that is what you do with them. Finally, if the artillery has nothing to shoot at, place it in ambush. Because at least it will be able to go down if something threatens it, and if an enemy moves up too close, well, you can shoot them. Of course not with a mortar, but howitzers can shoot directly. That's a neat trick as well. So, how do you play against it? My advice for people playing against this list is move every time you can, because if the enemy is shooting in on you, then you should make them pay for that, right? You should make them pay in time and effort for that indirect fire. They shouldn't be able to just do it without you punishing him for it. So move. Remember, it's at least 3 inches from your previous position, so you need to move a bit. Also, if you get close to them, they might not be able to shoot at you. Mortars have a minimum range, right? Indirect fire has a minimum range. So if you get too close to them, they won't be able to shoot at you. So if you have a close combat army, see if you can find a way to sneak them up to the enemy. And find a place there where you're relatively safe from all those guns, and stick to that place. Also, stick to line of sight blocking terrain. That is your friend. Although, remember, if they do have a multi-rocket launcher, do not stick behind houses. That will kill you. So, the final thing that I would suggest you try is, quite often a player who has a Leafblower list will try to stick to one flank. Will place most of his artillery on one flank. Sometimes they'll do it in the center, but quite often it's the flanks. If they go for the flank, you should try an outflank. Because having like a unit of SMGs or a flamethrower or whatever pop up right behind his artillery, that is always good fun. What are the advantages and disadvantages of playing a Leafblower list? The advantage is, of course, you have all the big guns. When you hit like a ton of bricks. It will a heavy howitzer will delete units completely. But it's not quite often that you hit. You have only a very few dice that really count. Most of the time it would be 4 or 5 shots per turn, and you have to have some of them hit. Otherwise you're wasting time basically, and that is no good. So So that is the main disadvantage. And if you're really unlucky with dice, like me, I really like having more dice in my hand because I can be fairly certain that the results will turn out non-binary on average, right? They will turn out so I get, on average, what I'm expecting to do. But if you're only rolling one dice, then it might turn up anything. Like 5 turns in a row. That could happen. It's not fun if it does, but it could happen. So, and that is one of the main disadvantages. The other main disadvantage is it's very, very expensive to run Leafblower lists in terms of points. So quite often, as I talked about before, your other supporting stuff will not be very strong. And that can lose your games. Maybe that's why we don't see that many Leafblower lists at competitive events, but I think they could be done. I don't think that they are a bad idea as such. I just haven't seen them run like efficiently enough. But I think you can. Right, that was the Leafblower list. Cheers.